Who could have imagined that Evelyn, once the incomparably noble Duchess, would now be pushed step by step onto the guillotine? The judge sternly demanded in public that she admit her guilt. Evelyn answered word by word, "I have never done such a thing." The mob below instantly erupted, cursing her as a witch and madly clamoring for her head to be cut off. The judge gave her one last warning. "This is your final chance to confess to God." At this very line between life and death, a mysterious little boy was clutching a bottle of pills of unknown origin. Could this thing really save her life? Edward instructed the boy that he had to give Evelyn the pills at the exact moment she was executed. The boy looked at him. "My Lord Duke, even if you return to the past, you would still come to find me." The scene shifted, and the judge's sentence rang out like thunder as he accused Evelyn of personally murdering her husband Daniel to conceal her infidelity. Facing this baseless accusation, Evelyn felt strangely calm inside. She knew Daniel's death was suspicious, and she knew even more that a huge conspiracy must be hidden behind the destruction of her family. Since she was going to die anyway, she might as well go to hell and find out the truth. With her father suddenly dead and herself sent to the guillotine, Evelyn knew all too well that a true devil must be hiding behind all these filthy accusations. Facing the madly shouting mob below, she raised her voice one last time and declared, "Only God knows the truth, and I have lived my life with a clear conscience." But those people would not listen at all, and the executioner brutally covered her mouth. The pill was shoved into her mouth. Could it be her mother? Had she specially prepared one last gift in advance so that her death would not be so painful? Evelyn closed her eyes and silently said to her mother in her heart, "Don't watch this. Please remember me, as I was at my most dignified." As the executioner gave the order, the headsman suddenly pulled the rope, and the heavy steel blade fell in an instant. At that very moment between life and death, Evelyn saw among the crowd someone who should have already been dead. Daniel? That was impossible. She had watched her husband be buried for a full 6 months, and she had searched for the truth like a madwoman. But the scar on that man's forehead was clearly Daniel's. Before she could call out that name, the cold steel blade had already cut everything off completely. In order to find out the truth behind her husband's murder, Evelyn had been secretly investigating all along, until one day she received an anonymous letter. The letter told her to go to an inn on the outskirts of the city, saying evidence of adultery was hidden there. But when she pushed open the last door, it was full of carefully arranged traps. Before she could react, a man turned around, and it was Edward. The two of them did not even have time to explain before the door was violently forced open, and a large group of royal guards filed in. Now this was trouble. Without any warning, she and Edward were accused of adultery on the spot. Adultery, murdering her husband. These absurd accusations instantly pushed Evelyn completely into the abyss. Amid the curses and insults of the crowd, she was treated as a witch and sent toward a dead end. But who could have thought that when she opened her eyes again, she was standing on a lively street, still wearing that gorgeous long dress? Could this be the world after death? Looking at the bustling crowd around her, it did not seem much different from when she was alive. Just then, a little flower-selling girl walked over and gently tugged at her skirt. "Miss, would you like to buy some flowers? How did you die?" The little girl tilted her head and asked innocently. Evelyn let out a soft sigh and said she had died young. Before the little girl could react, her mother yanked her away and said Evelyn was crazy. Evelyn had no time to care about that, because in the crowd she saw a figure that absolutely should not have appeared. It was Daniel. This made no sense at all. How could a husband who had been buried for half a year possibly watch his own wife be executed with his own eyes? She rushed over like a madwoman and tightly grabbed the man's arm. "Daniel, it's me." But the man violently shook off her hand, his eyes full of coldness and distance. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" Evelyn was completely stunned. The man before her was clearly her husband, so why was he looking at her like a stranger? Just then, a terrified scream suddenly rang out on the street. "Stop that horse. It's going to hit the child. Stop that horse. It's going to hit the child." Looking at the runaway horse before her, a long-buried memory suddenly flashed through Evelyn's mind. Daniel had once gently told her that the scar on his forehead had been left when he saved someone at the market. It was the badge he was proudest of as a husband. But Evelyn stared fixedly at the man before her. His forehead was smooth and unmarked, with no scar at all. The market, the startled horse, saving the child. At this moment, all these fragments suddenly fit together. This was not the world after death at all, but the real past. She had actually returned to the time before all the tragedy had begun. At that moment, Daniel coldly interrupted her thoughts. "So, what exactly is your name?" Evelyn looked at this face that was both familiar and strange. Only one thought remained in her heart. Since she had been given another life, then everyone's fate would have to be reshuffled. Seeing that the runaway horse was about to hit the child, Evelyn had no time to think. She dashed forward in one stride and clutched the child tightly. But at this critical moment, her body seemed petrified. No matter how hard she tried, she could not move her feet. Seeing that the hooves were about to come down, she knew that if that kick landed, she would certainly die, and Evelyn closed her eyes in despair. At that very last second, a broad black cloak appeared in front of her, and strong arms steadily pulled them into an embrace. A man's low voice sounded by her ear. Sorry, I'm late. Evelyn suddenly looked up and met a pair of gentle eyes. Edward softly called her name. Edward softly called her name. Evelyn Cordelia. Edward apologized in a low voice, saying he had come late. He not only knew Evelyn's full name, but also left behind a strange warning, telling her that no matter what, she had to stay alive. This was no ordinary dream at all, but more like a dangerous warning. Evelyn jolted awake, still not recovered from the shock just now. Things were becoming more and more wrong. Who exactly was that man? Evelyn instinctively called out Daniel's name, and the people around her immediately exploded into uproar. A down and out noble lady actually dared to call the Duke directly by name. Everyone was guessing what exactly their relationship was. Daniel stepped forward with a polite social smile on his face and asked, "Who are you?" Was he pretending not to know her, or deliberately testing her? Evelyn froze for a moment. If she admitted her identity now, all her previous efforts would be wasted. In the end, Evelyn could not hold on and collapsed to the ground in public, while Daniel's reaction was frighteningly cold. He merely casually ordered his subordinates to take this troublesome woman away. Just when everyone thought the matter had ended there, Daniel suddenly called to the maid beside him. He casually lifted the hem of the maid's skirt. There were actually bloodstains on the skirt. He said in a low voice, "Take her away." When Evelyn opened her eyes again, the surroundings had completely changed. This was the heavily guarded Dan's estate. Before she could figure out what was going on, she heard a cry of surprise by her ear. The maid keeping watch by her bed was actually Charlotte. Seeing Charlotte before her, Evelyn's thoughts instantly fell into chaos. The darkest moment in her memory surfaced again. That was when news had just come that Daniel had died. Evelyn had felt as if the sky had collapsed, and it was Charlotte who had stayed by her side the whole time, helping her endure those hardest days. Charlotte had originally been the daughter of a marquis, noble in status, and also the closest friend Evelyn trusted most in this world. No matter what happened to Evelyn, Charlotte was always there, even closer than family. But no matter how much Evelyn thought about it, she could not understand why the once highborn marquis's daughter was now here dressed as a maid. Evelyn had just wanted to speak when she realized Charlotte's eyes were full of unfamiliarity and politeness. Charlotte said the master had gone out hunting, and she acted as if she had never met Evelyn before. Now something was wrong, and Evelyn's heart suddenly sank. Could it be that the Charlotte before her really did not know her? To verify that absurd guess, Evelyn stared at her and asked, "What year, month, and day is it today?" When Charlotte gave no response, Evelyn's tone immediately became even harsher. "What? Are my words so hard to understand?" If her premonition was right, this was no longer simply a matter of having changed places. She had very likely returned to before all the tragedies happened. The first day of the 9th month, year 915 of the Fran calendar. That settled it completely. Evelyn had actually returned to 4 years earlier. This was not a dream. She had truly been reborn. Just then, the door was slowly pushed open, and a familiar voice came through. "Miss, how are you feeling?" Evelyn suddenly looked up and froze completely. The one who had pushed open the door and entered was actually Daniel. Looking at this gentle man before her, Evelyn tried hard to suppress the turmoil in her heart. Daniel behaved like a gentleman and did not even know her name yet. Now, the opportunity had really come. If this truly was 4 years earlier, then all the tragedies that had not yet happened would have a chance to be rewritten. Evelyn secretly swore to herself that she would never let Daniel die again. She would take control of the whole situation and make everything proceed according to her plan. She calmed her emotions a little, looked into Daniel's eyes, and said, "My name is Evelyn, daughter of Count Cordelia." She had thought that stating her identity would bring them closer, but who could have imagined that after hearing this name, Daniel would turn hostile on the spot. He let out a cold laugh, his tone full of anger and killing intent. "Who do you think you are talking to? You are from the Cordelia family?" Before Evelyn could react, a flash of cold light suddenly swept past. Daniel actually drew his sword directly and pressed it hard against her throat. Staring into her eyes, he said word by word, "Stop lying. The real Evelyn Cordelia died long ago." He said the real Evelyn had died half a year ago. It had been everyone's nightmare. At the bottom of that icy cliff, they had found the young lady's corpse with their own hands. The news spread throughout the territory, and everyone had thought she was already dead. Since the real person had long been gone, then who exactly was standing here now? Now, everything was completely reversed. Daniel coldly said that the real Evelyn had long since fallen off the cliff and had even been torn to pieces by wolves. Evelyn was completely stunned. She still wanted to struggle a little more, saying that she was the real person, and even instinctively called out his name. But this only exposed an even greater flaw. If she had lost her memory, how could she know Daniel's name? To stay alive, she could only insist that she really could not remember clearly, and even proposed writing to her father. As long as she could contact the Duke, there was still a chance to turn this game around. Daniel had no desire at all to listen to her explanation. He felt that killing this imposter was far simpler than verifying her identity. Just as the sword was about to fall, Lucas suddenly rushed out and firmly stood in front of Evelyn. He urged his brother to calm down first. Even if this woman was a liar, they should at least figure out her purpose first. Evelyn made a firm promise on the spot, so long as they gave her a little time. In the end, Daniel withdrew his hand and agreed to give her some time. For now, she had finally made it through this crisis. Looking at the bloodstain on her neck left by the sword, compared to nearly losing her life just now, such a small injury was nothing at all. Although Lucas kept apologizing on his brother's behalf and asking with concern about her injury, the current situation was still as precarious as walking on thin ice. This chance to catch her breath had been bought with her life. If she could not prove her identity as soon as possible, the next time that sword would pierce straight through her throat. Looking at the gentle and considerate Lucas before her, Evelyn could not help wondering whether he was actually the more reasonable brother. After all, Daniel's words just now had been unbearably harsh. In his eyes, Evelyn was nothing more than a liar who used amnesia as an excuse and spoke nothing but lies. Although Evelyn also admitted that Daniel's suspicion was entirely reasonable, she still felt that something was not quite right. The Daniel in her memory did not seem to be such a cold-blooded person. While she was lost in thought, Lucas once again politely apologized for his brother. His grace made him seem like a completely different person from the irritable Daniel. When Evelyn had married into the family back then, Lucas had been recuperating elsewhere due to illness, so this was still their first formal meeting. Faced with this completely unfamiliar younger brother and a husband whose temperament had changed drastically, Evelyn knew that every step from here on she would have to take with utmost caution. In Evelyn's memory, there was one person who had passed away in a hurry before even being able to attend the wedding, and she had always been curious what kind of person he actually was. Looking at the two brothers across the dining table, they did indeed look alike, but their personalities were worlds apart. Daniel's mouth was still merciless. He thought this fraud was unbelievably stupid. If she was going to impersonate a noblewoman, why choose Evelyn Cordelia of all names? That title was far too famous. How could a shabbily dressed commoner possibly fool everyone? Faced with such aggressive questioning, Evelyn did not argue. She merely rose calmly and returned to her room. Just endure this one more. Once father's reply arrives, all doubts will disappear. She silently prayed in her heart, "Father, this time you must help me." Evelyn picked up her pen and wrote a letter asking for help. In it, she told her father that although she was still alive, she had lost her memory and was now trapped in the Duke's residence, and begged him to come take her home. This letter was her last hope, because only Evelyn herself knew that in the original future, her father would die half a year later. If this truly was a return to the past, then her father had to still be alive. In that tragic future, her father would die half a year before her own death. If this really was a rebirth into the past, then her father had to still be alive. This letter was her final life-saving straw. As long as this letter could reach her father, he would definitely come at all costs and take her away from this hellish place. But the problem was that she was now trapped in the Duke's residence and had no way to go out in person. But once the letter was written, who could she find to send it out? The first person she thought of was the maid Charlotte, but she quickly shook her head. Their relationship had always been subtle. At a moment like this, Charlotte was absolutely not someone she could trust. She was surrounded by people watching her. If this letter failed to be sent out, all her plans would be completely ruined. Evelyn finally chose Sophia. This maid was quick and efficient, and most importantly, she looked like someone who would do things for money. Evelyn directly offered a condition. As long as the letter could be delivered to Cordelia Manor, this ruby ring would be her reward. Although Sophia was somewhat surprised, she still nodded and agreed, assuring her that she would definitely deliver the letter. But Evelyn knew very well in her heart that the girl would turn around and show the letter to Daniel. But that was precisely what she wanted. Every sentence in this letter to her father was the truth, without a single flaw. As long as Daniel read it and confirmed her identity, at the very least, he would not draw his sword and try to kill her at every turn anymore. Evelyn had thought her plan was foolproof. As long as she waited until tomorrow morning, once the brothers read the letter, her situation would improve completely. But on the way back to her room, a strange sound came from deep in the corridor. The intermittent whispers made her scalp crawl. She followed the sound to the door. It was Charlotte's voice, affectionately calling to her lover, and the one responding to her was actually the arrogant Daniel. Evelyn had never expected that she would stumble upon such a thing. The lofty heir to the dukedom was actually entangled with a maid. She held her breath and moved closer. Daniel was pouring out explicit words of love to someone else. She instinctively stepped back, unable to believe it. The man who kept saying he loved her had been deceiving her from beginning to end. Evelyn fled that room desperately, but in her mind there kept appearing the man who had sneered before the guillotine. That was what he truly looked like. If the person in her memory really was Daniel, then this marriage had been a dead end from the very beginning. In this family that prided itself on purity, the law stated that the husband was heaven, and the wife had to become the foundation of the household. Doesn't that sound sacred? But ironically, when betrayal truly occurred, the law became a knife for killing, and adultery here was defined as a grave crime. So that nightmare just now had been the very last moment before she was sent to the execution ground. Evelyn abruptly sat up, only then realizing that she was not dead and was still at Dan's estate. Now she understood everything. It had never been any accident. She had actually been killed by the people closest to her working together. The murderers were her husband Daniel and Charlotte. These two had become utterly insane for money. Looking back, All the tragedy had already been destined from the day she agreed to marry that man. This had been a conspiracy to seize the family fortune from the very beginning. The Cordelia family was unimaginably wealthy and controlled the largest trade business in the entire country, while Daniel's so-called noble family were nothing more than paupers from the countryside. But right after Daniel's death, the entire family had begun collapsing at a terrifying speed. It all started with her father. Connor Cordelia was falsely accused of embezzlement and died in an accident not long after, leaving behind a complete mess for the family. At the time, Evelyn swore that she would uncover the truth and restore her father's innocence. She searched through materials day and night, and in the end she really did seize the key evidence. But just as she was preparing to reveal the truth, Edward suddenly appeared, and immediately afterward, she was accused of murdering her husband. Only then did she finally wake up completely. Daniel had faked his death so that she would gather the evidence for him, allowing him to clear his own name in a perfectly legitimate way. Once Evelyn died, he could take that evidence and, while pretending to be the hero who vindicated his father-in-law, swallow all of the Cordelia family's property. This had been a dead end from the beginning. From start to finish, she had merely been a stepping stone that man used to amass wealth. Now that she had seen the truth clearly, this time, she would never let that man get his way again. Thinking back on it now, she had practically been blind before. Daniel and Charlotte often disappeared together, and despite such obvious flaws, she had chosen to ignore them all. Even the servants' eyes carried sympathy when they looked at her, yet she had been immersed in fake happiness and unwilling to investigate the truth. Just then, the door was pushed open. Charlotte, the accomplice who had helped kill her, walked in as if nothing had happened. Charlotte said calmly, "You're awake. I brought you a change of clothes." Looking at this woman's hypocritical face, Evelyn felt only disgust in her heart, especially hearing the words, "I will always stand by your side." What a convincing performance. Since you love acting so much, then let's play this next game slowly. Since Charlotte was the only one who knew the truth, then she would start with her and find a breakthrough. Evelyn stared at the woman and asked coldly, "Are the servants here all so ill-mannered that they do not even knock before entering?" Charlotte was stunned at first, then suddenly burst out laughing. She abruptly leaned close to Evelyn's ear, her tone full of ridicule. "You don't really think you're a noblewoman, do you?" Now the other side had completely dropped the act. Charlotte lowered her voice and warned, "His grace only keeps you here out of pity. Don't think you can really rise from the branch and become a phoenix. Someone of his status is not someone you could ever be worthy of." Looking at Charlotte's arrogant expression, this woman had clearly already regarded herself as the mistress of the house. She even turned around and threatened Evelyn, telling her to watch her tone in the future. Faced with Charlotte's provocation, Evelyn did not retreat this time. Her tone was calm, yet carried its own pressure as she warned directly, "Unless you can bear the consequences, put down the clothes and get out right now." Charlotte was completely stunned. She had never imagined that this woman would dare call her by name directly and even put on the air of a mistress of the house. Even after Evelyn turned and left, Charlotte was still cursing furiously behind her back. The room fell quiet. Evelyn looked at her own hands and knew very clearly that in the other woman's eyes, she was now a thorn in the flesh. Although those tragedies had not yet happened, she would never forgive this debt for as long as she lived. Just as she was thinking about what to do next, there came a knock at the door. Sophia apologized carefully from outside, saying she was sorry to disturb her rest. Seeing Sophia push open the door and enter, Evelyn put away the sharpness she had shown a moment ago. Sophia brought good news. The letter had already been sent out as instructed, and in just a few days it would reach the Cordelia family. Not only that, Sophia also returned the ruby ring completely untouched. She said it must be very important to Miss, and she was afraid Evelyn would suffer grievances here alone. Those words were like help in a snowstorm. Looking at this innocent maid, Evelyn tested her with a question. "Do you really believe that I am the daughter of the Cordelia family?" Sophia did not hesitate in the slightest and firmly addressed her as Miss. She even said that Evelyn looked like someone important. This unreserved trust became the only thing steadying Evelyn's heart at that moment. Evelyn tightened her grip on the ring in her hand, and the wavering in her heart instantly vanished. Since there was still someone willing to believe her, then she had even less time to sit here mourning. No matter what others said, no matter how others doubted her, she would reclaim the identity that belonged to her. This time, Evelyn decided to take the initiative. In the tavern late at night, she pushed open the door, all by herself. The owner looked up at her, his tone carrying a bit of surprise. "A woman, coming alone to a place like this in the middle of the night. What exactly do you want?" Evelyn lifted her hooded cloak, revealing a face filled with resolve. "I'm not here to drink. I want to see the mediator here." The man gave a cold laugh and offered two choices: find someone or kill someone. Evelyn's answer made the atmosphere instantly drop to freezing point. She wanted both, and the other party had to be capable of killing. "First room on the left on the second floor. The person will arrive shortly." The man handed over the key and did not forget to remind her, "Make sure to hide your identity well." This place was full of desperados, and if she exposed any flaw, no one would be able to save her life. Evelyn took the key. She knew better than anyone that every step she took now was a gamble with her life. The reason she had been manipulated before was because she had been too naive. But from this moment on, She would never give anyone another chance to hurt her. Since she had already walked in, then she would see who the final winner would be, especially that Charlotte. The more she thought about it, the more something felt wrong. How could an ordinary maid make Daniel so utterly devoted, unless her identity had been false from the very beginning? Evelyn gripped the dagger tightly in her hand. The truth was far crueler than she had imagined. The one who had wanted her dead in the first place was very likely this seemingly harmless maid. To keep the tragedy from happening again, she had to recover every detail she had missed in her previous life. She pushed open the door. The familiar furnishings instantly pulled her back into the past. This room was exactly where she had first met Edward. Could it be that even that man had been part of their plan? If all of this was truly a trap set by Daniel and Charlotte together, then how exactly had they dragged Edward into this mess as well? So Daniel was actually related to the royal family. No wonder he could cover the sky with one hand. Evelyn knew very well that to make a move against someone of such status, she had to find a helper who was not afraid of death. The man stepped out from the shadows and looked at the delicate guest before him, his tone full of mockery. A man like him recognized only money, not people, and his appetite was astonishingly large. So Evelyn had no interest in wasting words on him. Evelyn did not waste any words and stated her terms directly. As long as he could find out that person's background, he could name his price. The moment the ruby ring was revealed, the man's eyes went wide. He immediately changed his attitude and patted his chest as he promised that there was no one in this world he could not find. But when he heard the target's name, his expression changed instantly. This was no ordinary job, but one that meant licking blood off the edge of a knife. He immediately raised the price on the spot. Since the target status was so distinguished, the price of this deal naturally had to be doubled. He pressed forward step by step, convinced that the woman before him had no power to resist. Evelyn had nowhere left to retreat. Since the other party had already torn away all pretense, there was nothing left to worry about. She gripped the dagger hidden behind her back tightly, ready to get rid of this bastard once and for all at this very moment. But just as she was about to make her move, the man suddenly sensed that something was wrong. In the darkness, a pair of hands suddenly reached out and locked around his throat. Accompanied by the sound of bones cracking, the man who had been arrogant and overbearing just moments ago turned into a corpse in the blink of an eye. Evelyn stood frozen in place, staring at the black-robed figure who had suddenly appeared before her. This man who killed without blinking in the darkness was actually her old acquaintance, Edward. The moment he removed his hood, he called out Evelyn's full name. At that moment, the situation completely froze. Edward stared at the dagger in her hand, his tone carrying a hint of amusement. He asked Evelyn whether she had brought something like that because she was planning to kill him too. Before Evelyn had a chance to explain, the man suddenly closed in. The pressure he gave off left her with nowhere to hide, so she could only force herself to say that this was all a misunderstanding. But Edward did not buy it at all. Not only did he see through her disguise, he even discovered the secret she had hidden the deepest. He suddenly reached out and pulled off her cloak. That signature long dark blue hair was one of a kind in the entire territory, and Edward recognized her at a glance. On the surface, the two exchanged polite greetings, but every word between the lines was a test. Evelyn said she had returned to handle private matters, while Edward's reason for appearing here was clearly even less fit to see the light of day. Since both of them had secrets, they silently understood each other. Evelyn wisely shut her mouth and did not ask another question. She secretly glanced at the man on the ground, and he had already completely stopped breathing. Edward had acted cleanly and decisively, with no intention of leaving anyone alive. Who would have thought that the two families had once been family friends? Edward was even the heir to the Duke's title. Childhood sweethearts had now met again at the scene of a murder. Looking at Edward before her, Evelyn only felt that he seemed like a completely different person, especially compared with the quiet and reserved boy he had been when he was young. The current him was utterly impossible to read. Even stranger was that he had returned far earlier than he had in her previous life. Because of a sudden accident, both of his parents had died, and perhaps that was why his temperament had changed so drastically. But before Evelyn could finish sighing over it, Edward got straight to the point. He asked Evelyn whether she had brought money, and the way he looked as though he had fallen into a money pit left Evelyn unable to react for a moment. So he was asking for payment. Moreover, he knew exactly whom Evelyn was investigating and directly named the maid. Now it was Evelyn's turn to be unsettled. Just how much did this man know? Edward was an extremely dangerous person, and the lesson from her previous life had already been painful enough. But at the moment, he was the only one who could help her. This was no different from seeking a tiger's skin. But if she wanted to turn things around, she could only gamble on this. Since Edward cared only for money and not for people, Evelyn actually felt more reassured about this deal. She probed him by asking whether, as long as the price was right, he would take any job. Edward's answer was just as straightforward. As long as the price was suitable, nothing was impossible. So Evelyn directly asked whether he could protect her. That question actually caught Edward off guard. He clearly had not expected this woman to make such a request. Seeing this, Evelyn immediately changed her wording. She stared into Edward's eyes and said word by word, "Protect me." After hearing that, Edward smiled. He asked in return, Are you asking me to stay by your side? After receiving an affirmative answer, he instead appeared especially cold and said bluntly that he did not want to stay by anyone's side right now. He even added another jab, saying that Evelyn was not his type at all. Seeing that he was about to leave, Evelyn directly revealed her trump card. As long as her goal could be achieved, he could name any price he wanted. She admitted frankly that her current situation was very troublesome, so she had to find someone like him, someone who was truly willing to risk his life for her. Edward stopped walking and asked the most crucial question. Since you want someone to risk his life, what makes you trust me so much? Edward even used his earlier words as an excuse, saying that since he was not her type, why was she still looking for him? But Evelyn did not play along at all. She reached out and pulled open the man's cloak, revealing the hidden silver crescent mark. It turned out that she had already seen through him. Edward was actually a member of the Shadow Order. Although she did not know why he had joined, she knew the rules of that organization very well. So long as they were paid, the task would definitely be completed. With his identity exposed on the spot, Edward was not angry at all. Instead, he found this woman more and more interesting. He smiled and told Evelyn that from now on, whenever she needed him, she could call his name at any time. Evelyn was stunned when she heard that. Did that mean that as long as she called his name, he would appear instantly, like an elf? Edward did not deny it, and only showed a meaningful smile. It seemed that this deal had finally been concluded completely. Evelyn teased that the relationship between them now seemed a little too close, to the point that neither of them was being polite at all. Before Evelyn could react, he waved his hand and turned to leave. That casual attitude caught Evelyn somewhat off guard. She shouted at his retreating figure that the next time she called him, he had to appear immediately, or else he should not expect to get a single coin in payment. Without even turning his head, Edward answered in agreement, his tone as light as if he were playing a game. Watching him disappear into the night, Evelyn could not help sighing that he really was a strange man. But in that place called Frandier, there were quite a few people like him. They were called mediators, specializing in finding missing persons or settling disputes. More importantly, they also handled the dirty work that the law simply could not touch. Although the market was full of boastful mediators, the only one that truly controlled the underground world was the Shadow Order Edward belonged to. No one could compare with the power of that organization. Evelyn stood at the doorway and sank into thought. Being able to win over someone like that was indeed a good thing. But the entire matter was full of strangeness at every turn. How did Edward know that she was investigating Charlotte? And how could he have grasped her movements so precisely? None of this could be explained at all, and it even made her wonder whether Edward had made some sort of deal with the devil. After all, if something like rebirth could happen, then what was impossible? She was planning to ask him clearly the next time they met, but then she discovered that in the darkness, several pairs of eyes had already fixed on her. One of them suddenly stepped forward to block Evelyn and asked whether she had seen a man run past in a hurry. These people were clearly up to no good. Evelyn had wanted to play dumb and muddle through, but the other side had obviously come prepared. The man stared at her coldly and said that someone had just died in the inn, and a witness had seen the murderer run out from the room of a girl wearing a hooded cloak. Now the matter had completely blown up. The man beside him directly reached out and grabbed Evelyn, forcing her to tell them where that man had gone, and even threatened that as long as she explained clearly, they would let her go. Evelyn was being dragged so hard that she could not move. In her panic, she suddenly remembered what Edward had said before leaving. As long as she called his name, he would appear. She took a deep breath and shouted into the night sky with all her strength, "Edward." That shout left everyone around her stunned. But after waiting for a long time, there was nothing around them except the sound of the wind. The stillness in the air was terrifying. Evelyn looked at the empty space behind her, and her heart instantly went cold. He was not there. He really was not here. The man had completely lost his patience. He raised his axe and roared loudly, thinking Evelyn was unbelievably stupid for actually believing that the Shadow Order could save her life. Watching the axe come down, Evelyn closed her eyes in despair, with only one thought left in her mind. This could not end like this. At that critical moment, a shrill neigh suddenly rang out across the night sky. A white horse charged into the crowd as if it had gone mad, and with its tremendous force, it sent the man who was about to strike flying. This sudden turn of events frightened everyone senseless. Who could have thought that in this desolate wilderness, a horse would suddenly come charging out? The scene instantly descended into chaos. Driven back by the horse's hooves, the men fled in all directions, crying out miserably. Evelyn reacted extremely quickly. Taking advantage of the chaos, she turned and ran straight into the depths of the forest. The man shouted furiously behind her for her to stop, but at a time like this, who would listen to him? It turned out that the white horse had been deliberately released by Edward to save her. As he soothed his mount, he hid in the darkness and watched Evelyn flee. Watching that figure running desperately, Edward could not help feeling a little emotional. The Evelyn of the past had just been a naive duchess who understood nothing. But now it seemed that after going through all those changes, she had indeed become completely different. Noelle and Kendrick also arrived at the scene. Looking in the direction where Evelyn had disappeared, Noelle asked hesitantly how that young lady was doing now. Edward looked into the distance and replied calmly, "She is safe now." Since he had already taken this job, he had no intention of backing out. No matter what, he would protect Evelyn to the end. Meanwhile, in another room, Charlotte was clinging to Daniel and complaining, insisting that he drive away the newly arrived girl. She said that girl was simply too arrogant and had even dared to threaten her, saying that she would make her regret it. Daniel listened absent-mindedly and merely casually praised Charlotte's beauty a few times, wanting to brush the matter aside. But Charlotte still refused to let it go. She felt that the girl was clearly just a commoner, or perhaps a slave, and yet she still put on the arrogant airs of a noble. Daniel, however, let out a cold laugh. He said he could never be mistaken. There was a special aura about that girl, one that only their own kind would have. He told Charlotte to shut up and go to sleep and stop asking about such useless things. But clearly, Evelyn's appearance had already aroused the suspicions of even more people. Faced with Daniel's indifference, Charlotte could only answer softly, "Yes, my lord." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Although she agreed readily enough, the fire in her heart simply would not die down. She stared silently into the void, clearly having no intention of letting Evelyn off so easily. This feeling of being neglected made the hatred in her heart take root completely. It is time to sort out this mess. Daniel and Charlotte really had gotten involved with each other before I appeared. Even more absurdly, Lucas, who was rumored to be weak and sickly, was actually in very good health. And right now, I am still a dead person in name. Things are getting more and more wrong, especially that Edward. Just then, there was a sudden knock at the door. Evelyn quickly crumpled the note into a ball. The moment Charlotte entered, she spoke in a sarcastic tone, saying that anyone serving Evelyn must be pitiful, and she even began to question Evelyn's identity. Evelyn replied coldly, "I did not let you come in. Besides, why does the dress you are wearing look so familiar to me?" Not only did Charlotte show no guilt, she instead looked smug and said that she had found it in the laundry room and thought it was pretty, so she altered it herself. Evelyn directly questioned her, "Why did you take someone else's belongings?" As a result, Charlotte said smugly that the one coveting something that did not belong to her was actually Evelyn. At that point, the smell of gunpowder could no longer be hidden. Charlotte also hinted from the side that Daniel belonged to her and that there was no place for Evelyn here at all. Who would have thought that after hearing this, Evelyn actually laughed instead? She sized Charlotte up from head to toe and said calmly that indeed, she suited that dress better than Evelyn did. Before Charlotte could react, Evelyn added another stab. "I'm giving it to you. I mean it." This time, Charlotte completely panicked. She felt that Evelyn was mocking her, treating her like a beggar, and tossing her charity. This feeling of being looked down upon made the fire in her heart impossible to suppress any longer. She swore to herself that she would definitely get rid of Evelyn and get rid of everyone who stood in her way. Now things had become seriously troublesome. Charlotte had already developed murderous intent. Looking at this familiar garden, Evelyn thought of the days gone by. Back then, after losing her child, all she could do every day was wander here aimlessly. She often sat alone by the table, sitting there for an entire day at a time. Back then, she could never have imagined that she would actually be given another chance to start over. Looking back now, although this place was large, there was not a single person who truly stood on her side. Even a diligent servant like Sophia was only polite to her on the surface. That politeness was not because she was Evelyn, but merely because she was Daniel's wife. She did not want to live that kind of dependent life ever again in this lifetime. Evelyn had always been suspicious that Lucas and Duke Brantley might also have been involved in Daniel's plan. Just then, a maid came running over to complain that the household cellar was nearly empty, and if things continued like this, the family would go bankrupt. But Sophia mysteriously added that she had heard Daniel had recently made a big investment, and if it succeeded, the return could increase 100-fold. She immediately remembered a huge scam from her previous life. Those swindlers had used oil as a pretense and gone around boasting about some kind of flame stone. They had no oil field at all and had merely built a shell factory to swindle money, specifically preying on those who wanted to get rich overnight. Evelyn realized that this time Daniel was probably going to drag the whole family into this bottomless pit, and now things were truly troublesome. On the surface, Duke Brantley was courteous and said that he had always wanted a clever daughter-in-law, but in truth, all of it was just an act. Evelyn knew better than anyone that the reason this old fox had let her marry Daniel was not because he valued her, but because he had set his sights on her family's money. They were squandering money here without restraint, simply waiting to use this marriage to fill their financial hole. In this family, there was no one who truly stood on her side. Evelyn even thought of Edward, but when life and death truly hung in the balance, would he really appear? This feeling of being betrayed by the whole world made her head feel as though it were splitting apart. So it was not just Daniel and Charlotte. There were wolves everywhere around her wanting to gnaw at her flesh. Just then, Lucas suddenly walked over. He asked with a concerned expression, "Miss Evelyn, are you feeling unwell somewhere?" Looking at Lucas before her, Evelyn suddenly realized something. He truly had not betrayed her, because in her previous life, He had already died before her wedding. But the strangest part was precisely this. Lucas should by all rights already have been gravely ill. Yet the man before her looked unusually healthy. Lucas noticed that Evelyn had been staring at him and smiled as he asked whether there was something on his face. Evelyn quickly found an excuse, saying that she had simply become lost in thought. She decided to find a chance to speak alone with this man who had come back from the dead and see what secrets he was hiding. Lucas seemed to see through her thoughts. Not only did he not leave, he instead moved a little closer and said he was all ears, then even asked a baffling question. "Miss Evelyn, do you like the sea?" That abrupt and seemingly meaningless question made the situation even more confusing. Faced with Lucas's question about the sea, Evelyn only replied lightly, "I suppose so." Lucas smiled and smoothly extended an invitation. "In that case, would you like to go on a picnic with me tomorrow?" Evelyn paused. It was as if someone had handed her a pillow the moment she felt sleepy. She had been worrying about not having a chance to investigate this man. This was a perfect opportunity to be alone with him. As long as she could avoid the eyes of others, the secrets Lucas carried would come to light tomorrow. Charlotte completely panicked this time. If Daniel really sided with that woman, then she would be completely finished. She had to seize some leverage over that woman. Just as her mind was in complete turmoil, the stable manager Dick came over and cautiously asked whether someone had upset her. Charlotte did not even spare him a proper glance. In a harsh tone, she mocked him. "What? Could you actually solve them for me?" Unexpectedly, this fool took her seriously and looked ready to risk his life at any moment. But all he got in return was Charlotte's even deeper disgust as she told him to get back and scrub the toilets. She waved her fingertips in disdain, as if shooing away a noisy fly. The loyalty of such a lowly person only made her feel that her own worth had been dragged down. But in the next second, when Charlotte turned her head, she saw Sophia walking together with a man. Sophia was actually meeting a man in private? These two clearly were not simple at all, and a thought instantly surfaced in her mind. She turned to look at Dick beside her, and her tone suddenly became gentle. "Are you really willing to get rid of the people who are troubling me?" After getting an affirmative answer, Charlotte moved close to him at once. "In that case, do something for me." On the other side, Lucas was enthusiastically saying that he wanted to take Evelyn to a breathtakingly beautiful beach. But he had no idea that Evelyn had already been there countless times with Daniel. Lucas was stammering, trying to explain, but before he could finish, he was interrupted by Daniel, who suddenly appeared. In an icy tone, Daniel directly questioned Lucas, asking what exactly he was doing here with this woman. Lucas still wanted to smooth things over for Evelyn, but Daniel refused to accept it and even invoked their father to pressure him, telling him to stop wandering around outside. Their father's name came down like a heavy weight, and Lucas's defense was forcibly choked back. The air instantly dropped to freezing point, and all that remained around them was the sound of oppressive breathing. After warning his younger brother, Daniel fixed Evelyn with a fierce stare and told her she had better not get any crooked ideas. Evelyn did not back down at all and immediately shot back, telling him to put his mind at ease. Looking at the way the two of them were at each other's throats, Evelyn knew very well that the relationship between these brothers was probably even worse than she had imagined. Watching Daniel walk away, Lucas hurriedly apologized for his brother, saying he had just returned after handling matters for their father and was in a bad mood. Evelyn then took the opportunity to ask when the Duke would be returning. Lucas gently comforted her, saying that their father would not be back for a long time and that even if Daniel ran to complain, he would find a way to persuade him. What surprised Evelyn the most was that Lucas actually said he completely believed her identity without the slightest suspicion. For a moment, Evelyn could hardly believe it. After all, everyone was doubting her now, but Lucas's reason was very simple. He felt that Evelyn did not seem like someone who would lie. Now it was Evelyn's turn to be speechless. After all that, this young master judged people entirely by intuition. But Lucas's next words instantly made the atmosphere tense. He said that Sophia had already told him about the letter and that Daniel was still completely in the dark about it. Looking into the distance, Lucas suddenly said in a low voice, "You remind me of my mother." Evelyn was a little surprised. She remembered that according to the rumors, the Duchess had died of a hereditary disease, and Lucas had always been believed to have inherited it as well. But what Lucas said next made the whole matter turn strange. He said that when he was very young, his mother had died in an epidemic. Evelyn immediately sensed that something was wrong. A disease like that could not possibly be hereditary. It seemed that Lucas's strange illness and the Duchess's death both hid a huge lie behind them. If his mother had died in an epidemic, then Lucas's so-called hereditary disease was nothing but a complete lie. Faced with Lucas's invitation to a picnic, Evelyn could only make an excuse to refuse, because Daniel was still watching her, and for now it was best to avoid attracting attention. To keep Lucas from feeling too disappointed, she casually made a promise, saying that if there was a chance in the future, she would definitely take him to see the sea. After night fell, Evelyn walked alone through the corridor. The more she thought about it, the more wrong it all felt. Lucas's death definitely had another hidden cause, and she had to investigate it to the very end. But just then, a voice suddenly came from the darkness and called her name. Evelyn spun around, and after seeing the other person's face, She froze completely. It turned out to be Dick, the stable manager. He came running over in a hurry to tell Evelyn that a man had come by during the day and brought some terrible news. That man claimed that the letter Evelyn had sent to Lady Cordelia had been snatched by bandits halfway there and suggested that she hurry to meet the person involved. That letter contained quite a few secrets. If it fell into someone else's hands, the consequences would be unimaginable. But who could have guessed that the supposedly stolen letter was at this very moment in Edward's hands? As he flipped through it, a meaningful smile spread across his face. In his eyes, although Evelyn was not lacking in initiative, she was still too inexperienced in the end, a careless woman. Noelle really could not hold back anymore and directly asked Edward whether that young lady had already started trying to seduce him. After all, Edward had indeed been paying far too much attention to Evelyn lately and had even, for the first time ever, asked, "Could it be that women do not like my type?" Now Noelle was certain. The master of the house had definitely fallen for her. That woman was indeed not simple. Edward handed the letter to Kendrick to deal with and turned to leave. Noelle quickly asked him where he was going. "I have a feeling that young lady needs me right now." This time Evelyn was truly panicked. She had calculated everything except the possibility that the letter would be intercepted by bandits. Right now, Frandier was full of local snakes everywhere, and there was no truly safe place at all. Whether a letter could be delivered depended entirely on luck. If those bandits were really connected to that faction, then things would completely blow up. Who exactly stole that letter? The guide lowered his head and, after a long while, finally squeezed out a sentence, saying that he was not very good with words. Evelyn had no patience to listen to this. She had to find out immediately who the other party really was. The guide took out a map and said that he was clumsy with words and could not explain clearly, so it would be better if Evelyn looked at the marked location herself. The map clearly showed that the place was on the edge of Dan's territory. Evelyn lowered her head to examine it carefully, completely failing to notice the danger behind her. At that very instant, a strange smile appeared on the guide's face. He suddenly reached out and shoved Evelyn straight off the cliff. Evelyn's whole body dropped into empty air. She had never imagined that this would turn out to be a dead end. How could I be this stupid? Why didn't I realize this was a trap? My revenge hasn't even begun, and the truth still hasn't been uncovered. Am I really going to die here so meaninglessly? I clearly haven't had the chance to do anything yet. A voice suddenly echoed in Evelyn's mind. "As long as you need me, call my name at any time." Using every bit of strength in her body, she shouted that name. She had thought it was only a dying hallucination, but accompanied by a burst of urgent hoofbeats, that man actually came cutting through the air. Riding a white horse, Edward caught Evelyn steadily in midair. Looking at the woman in his arms, he softly said, "At your service anytime." Evelyn had not yet come back to her senses. She only stared at the man before her and murmured, "You really came." Edward smiled and said that he admired Evelyn's decisiveness very much, and also liked the ruby ring she had put up as collateral. Just as Evelyn was about to ask where exactly he had appeared from, Edward suddenly signaled for her to stay quiet, because the murderer on the cliff was at that moment staring fixedly at them. Only after the danger had eased a little did Evelyn quietly say, "Thank you." But Edward clearly had no intention of letting it end there. He reminded Evelyn that since he had accepted the deposit, he would naturally handle the matter properly, but if she continued to be so reckless in the future, that ring would not be enough to pay the bill. Evelyn had no mind to think about debts right now. She only wanted to know where the letter was. As a result, Edward casually dropped shocking news. The letter supposedly stolen by bandits was already in his hands and was being sent to Cordelia Manor. Now it was Evelyn's turn to be completely stunned. Edward spoke without the slightest politeness, bluntly saying that with the way Evelyn acted on impulse, she would very likely fail to see the overall situation clearly. Evelyn fell silent. She admitted that if she had thought things through more carefully, she really should not have made such a basic mistake. But she understood even more clearly that if there had been even one person by her side who could help her, things would not have turned out like this. Just then, the white horse beside them suddenly let out a cry. Only then did Evelyn notice that the horse looked especially familiar. Stroking the horse's head, Evelyn casually asked what its name was. Edward froze for a moment and tentatively answered, "Bailey?" Evelyn almost laughed out loud. "Who was asking for your name?" "I was asking this horse." Only then did Edward realize. With some hesitation, he gave a name. Edward suddenly asked, "Do you know how to use a sword?" Evelyn froze for a moment and frankly said that she did not know how at all. The last time she carried a dagger, it had only been to scare people. Edward said no more nonsense. He directly drew the long sword he carried and placed it in Evelyn's hands. He told Evelyn that she did not need any fancy moves. As long as she straightened her arm and thrust forward, it would be enough to deal with an enemy. To teach Evelyn, Edward even demonstrated personally and encouraged her to try it herself. Evelyn gripped the hilt tightly and thrust straight at Edward, her movement clean and sharp, not at all like a beginner. Edward turned sideways to dodge, his tone full of praise as he said she was an excellent student. It seemed that in this dangerous game, Evelyn was finally going to reclaim the weapon that belonged to her. Evelyn now felt full of confidence. She said that she was already smart enough and could completely handle the business affairs in the family, and of course, she did not forget to flatter him along the way, saying it was all because she had such an excellent teacher. But Edward was not swayed by that at all. He suddenly bent down and closed in, moving so quickly that there was no time to react. He pressed down on the sword in Evelyn's hand, his tone abruptly turning serious, and in his eyes seemed to be written the most important point of all. No matter when, she must never let down her guard. Looking into Edward's eyes so close at hand, Evelyn froze. Late at night in the Duke's residence, Daniel suddenly lost his temper. With news this important, the maid had only just reported it now. The maid was so frightened that she repeatedly begged for mercy, saying that because Daniel had not been home, she had first told the other heir, Lucas, about the letter. Now Daniel could no longer sit still. He felt that this was outright betrayal. Could it be that in the eyes of these servants, Lucas was the one more fit to inherit the title? At this point, the situation was completely thrown into chaos. Daniel had originally thought that the woman had written the letter to find an accomplice, but the letter had actually been sent to someone else. If the contents of the letter were really as the maid described, then his earlier plan would probably completely fall through. Daniel finally confirmed that the woman's true identity was Evelyn, and now things had instead become interesting. Not only did he not find it troublesome, he actually took it as a good opportunity. A woman like her would sooner or later fall into his hands. On the other side, Edward was sternly reminding Evelyn never to lower her guard. Even a momentary lapse could cost her life. Evelyn smiled and nodded in agreement, saying that she really had judged wrongly a bit, and had not even noticed that Edward had started speaking more and more casually. As a result, the two of them actually started arguing over this trivial matter in the garden. Edward felt that being only 2 years older meant nothing at all, but Evelyn clearly did not think so. The words reached Edward's lips, but he forcibly swallowed them back. He looked at the not yet bright sky and proposed that, before the sun came out, they should train a little longer. Evelyn was a little puzzled as to why they had to wait specifically for daylight. With a serious expression, Edward reminded her that protecting her safety was his duty, and that since it was still too dark, he absolutely could not let her take risks alone. Only then did Evelyn realize that the person who had once pushed her into the water from the shadows must still be hiding in the estate and watching her now. Only when everyone was busy would it be the best time to sneak back in. She said nothing more and simply tightened her grip on the long sword in her hand. Since the danger had not yet been resolved, then she would use this time to make herself stronger. Looking at Evelyn's determined expression, Edward knew that this woman was already prepared to personally take back everything that belonged to her. At the first light of dawn, Edward took Evelyn to the back door. He had deliberately chosen this hidden entrance. As long as they moved fast enough, the people in the residence would definitely not discover them. Before leaving, Edward did not forget to remind her to hurry back and get some sleep. After all, last night's special training had been so intense that Evelyn had collapsed from exhaustion several times halfway through. Watching Edward's figure ride away on horseback, Evelyn took a deep breath. The road ahead could only be walked by herself now. Although Evelyn refused to admit it aloud and said that she was only a beginner, she knew in her heart that her current physical strength really was her weak point. She happened to run into a guard yawning. While everyone was busy with their own things, Evelyn slipped in soundlessly. At least this first step had been taken steadily. Evelyn felt that she had returned at just the right time. As long as she quietly went back to her room now, no one would discover that she had been gone all night. But just as she reached the corridor, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Charlotte was actually standing right in front of her, staring fixedly at her. Not only did Evelyn not avoid her, she even greeted her openly and asked what she was doing standing there so early in the morning. She then casually mocked her as well, asking why she looked as if she had seen a ghost. Charlotte was clearly caught off guard by the question, and after a long pause, she finally squeezed out that she was only here to work, even turning around to accuse Evelyn of talking nonsense. Looking at Charlotte's guilty expression, Evelyn already had her answer in her heart. It seemed that who exactly had wanted to harm her last night was now almost self-evident. Evelyn thought of the tragedies that had not yet happened. Although the current Charlotte was still only a little maid blinded by jealousy, she had already completely crossed the line. Charlotte was still speaking in that mocking, insinuating tone, thinking Evelyn had come to inspect her work. She even let out a ridiculing laugh, convinced that this young lady could do nothing to her. But in the very next second, without a single extra word, Evelyn swung and slapped her hard across the face. That slap stunned Charlotte on the spot. Evelyn knew very clearly in her heart that this woman not only wanted her dead, but would become even more vicious in harming her in the future. Since the other party had already developed murderous intent, there was no need for her to be polite anymore. Clutching her face, Charlotte shouted furiously and demanded to know how Evelyn dared to hit her. Evelyn merely looked at her coldly. Compared with the disgusting things Charlotte had done, this little lesson did not even count as interest. Evelyn coldly threw down one sentence. Do not mistake her forbearance for weakness. If there was a next time, she would absolutely make the other party pay the price. Watching Evelyn's departing back, Charlotte shrieked angrily in the corridor. Just then, her accomplice Dick came hurrying over, saying that everything he had been told to do last night had already been handled properly. Pointing in the direction where Evelyn had disappeared, Charlotte demanded to know what exactly Dick had accomplished. If it had really been done properly, Then who was that lively person just now? Now Dick was dumbfounded too. He swore that he had seen with his own eyes the hired killer push the young lady off the cliff. From that height, there was no way she could possibly have survived. Charlotte only felt as if she had seen a living ghost. She was so frightened that she wanted to go report it to Daniel immediately, but Dick firmly stopped her. The two of them completely lost control in the corridor and even started laying hands on each other. This carefully planned murder had not only failed to get rid of Evelyn, but had instead become a nightmare for the two of them. While Charlotte and Dick were still in complete disarray over this matter, the Cordelia residence had already exploded into chaos because of one letter. Looking at the letter in his hand, Connor could hardly believe his eyes. His daughter Evelyn, who had been declared dead, was actually still alive. This was earth-shattering news. Connor could not sit still for even a second. He loudly ordered his men to prepare the carriage immediately. An attendant still tried to remind him that there was an important meeting in the afternoon, but Connor could not care about anything now. To him, nothing was more important than seeing his daughter. He had to set out immediately and go to the Dance family to bring Evelyn back. And all of this was within Edward's plan. Kendrick was a little worried. They had clearly had a chance to take her away last night, so why still let her remain in the tiger's den? Edward knew very well that forcibly taking her away now would only make the situation even more dangerous. That boy Daniel wanted to use Evelyn as a bargaining chip to prove himself before his father, so before his old man returned, he would never let her go. Actually, Edward had originally wanted to take her away, but Evelyn refused. She wanted to return to that manor herself and wait there for her father to appear, so that she could completely finish what needed to be done. Since she had already made up her mind, Edward did not insist further. He turned his head and said to Kendrick beside him, "We should set out as well. Go drag out that key person." Early in the morning, Lucas appeared by the dining table. On the surface, he was expressing concern, but his eyes were full of probing. He felt that Evelyn's state was not quite right, and that she must not be used to living here. Evelyn responded casually, but inwardly, she was in total turmoil. After all, with everything that had happened over the past few days, no one could have endured it easily. Escaping death, again and again, each incident had been enough to take her life. Who exactly was he? Not only had he saved her, he had also behaved with unusual calm and had not shown the slightest doubt toward any of her plans. This feeling was very wrong. It was not that he seemed uninterested. Rather, it was as if he had already seen through everything long ago. Lucas really had no filter. The moment he opened his mouth, he asked Evelyn whether she was thinking about some old lover. That single sentence completely stunned Evelyn. Seeing that she did not respond, Lucas became even more enthusiastic. He said that since she had amnesia now, who knew whether she might previously have hidden from everyone that she had secretly been involved with someone. The more Evelyn listened, the more ridiculous it sounded. She even started worrying that if she really had been married before, then this mess would become completely enormous. Just as she did not know how to respond, Daniel suddenly walked over. He directly interrupted Lucas's teasing and told him to stop acting here. This whole hero saving the beauty routine only made the atmosphere even stranger. Daniel now looked like a completely different person. Not only was he showing concern and asking after her well-being, he even wanted the cook to remake breakfast for Evelyn. This excessive attentiveness made Evelyn's skin crawl. She could not see through what exactly this man was plotting. Just when the atmosphere was at its most oppressive, Daniel suddenly stood up and forcibly took Lucas outside, saying that he had some private matters to discuss. Once they reached a place with no one around, Daniel directly asked whether Lucas had really fallen for this woman. Although Lucas forced himself to sound firm and said that this matter had nothing to do with anyone else, deep down he did not actually have any confidence. From the bottom of his heart, Daniel felt that someone as shallow and vain as Lucas had no right at all to inherit the dukedom. But the more Daniel spoke, the more blunt he became. He admitted that Evelyn was indeed beautiful, but more importantly, he had his eye on the property behind her. As long as he could get his hands on that wealth, Evelyn would be the perfect candidate for a wife. Lucas finally could not bear listening anymore and directly asked him, "Then what do you take Charlotte for?" Who could have imagined that Daniel would actually let out a cold laugh and say that Charlotte was nothing more than a toy for amusement, completely unfit to be presented publicly. He even mocked Lucas for being too naive, convinced that in the end their father would definitely hand Evelyn over to him. But he completely failed to notice that Charlotte was standing outside the door at that very moment, hearing every one of those heartless words loud and clear. Daniel still thought victory was already in his grasp, unaware that he had personally planted a mine for himself that could explode at any moment. Daniel had just stepped out of the room when he ran into a grim-faced Charlotte. Charlotte had completely thrown caution to the wind and demanded to know whether Daniel had lost his mind, actually planning to marry that woman of unknown origin. She reminded Daniel not to forget what he had promised her in the beginning, that he would help her escape the status of a maid. But now Daniel had turned his back on her and even coldly warned her to recognize her place. In Daniel's eyes, even if Evelyn was a fraud, her status was still far above that of a maid like her. Charlotte had never imagined that the man she had trusted with all her heart had been treating her as nothing more than a stepping stone all along. Just then, Evelyn walked over, and the coldness on Daniel's face vanished instantly. He turned and put on a gentle expression, asking her with concern whether she had enjoyed breakfast. Watching how close the two of them looked, Charlotte, standing to the side, could no longer hide the hatred in her heart. This household was truly about to change. The moment Evelyn appeared, she happened to catch Daniel and Charlotte together. Pretending to be casual, she asked whether she had interrupted the two of them. Daniel immediately put on a smile and even praised Charlotte in front of Evelyn for being so attentive and taking care of things. Evelyn smoothly picked up the thread as well, saying that Charlotte had stayed up the entire night taking care of her. On the surface, those words sounded like praise, but in reality, every sentence carried a hidden meaning. Charlotte anxiously tried to grab Daniel and explain, but Daniel's mind was now full of Evelyn, and he had no interest in paying attention to this toy. He even announced on the spot that he would hold a grand banquet for Evelyn. On the surface, he said it was to welcome her arrival, but in truth he wanted to use the opportunity to thoroughly investigate her background. Looking at the look of absolute confidence on Daniel's face, anyone could tell that this banquet was definitely not meant with good intentions. Evelyn asked in return whether this was supposed to be a welcome party. Daniel did not answer directly, only staring at her as he asked, "Miss Evelyn, what do you think of the idea?" This sudden enthusiasm made Evelyn feel that things were not so simple. She simply asked outright why he had suddenly brought it up. With a helpless look on his face, Daniel explained that his father was not home, so he had to be extra cautious. It sounded like an apology, but his true purpose was probably known only to himself. Evelyn found the words especially ironic. Not long ago, this man had been holding a sword to her throat, and now he had suddenly put on a completely different face. Daniel actually dropped to one knee in public and said with deep affection that from the first moment he saw her, he had already fallen for her completely. He even made up a damsel-saving hero story, saying that Evelyn's gallant figure when she saved the runaway horse that day had made it impossible for him to keep hiding his feelings. Now it was Evelyn's turn to be stunned. She had absolutely no idea what kind of act this man was putting on, because in her memory, the person who had really stepped in to save her that day was not Daniel at all. This lie was absurdly far-fetched. Evelyn's mind was filled with the image of that man. Just as she was lost in thought, Daniel suddenly called out to her, forcibly pulling her back to reality. Daniel held her hand, and his tone sounded especially sincere. He said that drawing his sword at her before had only been a test, because everyone had believed that the daughter of that family had long since died. But the more she thought about it, the more something felt wrong. If what Daniel said was true, then why had Edward seemed so calm? What exactly else did he know? Daniel did not give her time to keep thinking. He stood up directly and once again proposed holding a banquet in her name. He said it was to completely turn the page on the unpleasantness of the past. Daniel's performance was simply too perfect. He gently held Evelyn's hand and softly said that he had already forgotten their previous unhappiness and was instead grateful for her arrival. Evelyn also followed his lead and continued the act, smiling as she said that she was very much looking forward to the upcoming banquet. The two of them looked like a pair of true allies, but no one noticed that Charlotte was hiding in the shadows, staring fixedly at the scene. Then she turned around and quickly left, clearly unable to sit still any longer. As night fell, the castle blazed with lights, and this banquet full of hidden agendas finally began. Everyone was waiting to see who would be the first to expose a flaw. The banquet had only just begun when Evelyn was surrounded by a crowd of people trying to ingratiate themselves with her. These people were practically like flies. They grabbed her hand and refused to let go, their minds full of how to strike a business deal with her. After finally finding a chance to get away, Evelyn had not even had time to catch her breath. When Lucas came over holding a wine glass, looking very considerate as he asked whether she was tired, Evelyn did not bother being polite with him and directly threw out a sharp question. She asked whether, when she had first claimed to be Cordelia, Lucas had also thought she was lying. After all, in everyone's eyes, the real Evelyn had already died long ago, and how could a dead person possibly come back to life? Lucas merely smiled. His words sounded meaningful. He said that he had only felt that Evelyn did not look like a liar, and besides, he had never seen the body with his own eyes. Lucas gently swirled the wine in his glass, probing with every word. He said that regarding Evelyn's identity, his brother Daniel had originally always believed that someone was impersonating her. Evelyn sensed that something was off and followed up by asking whether the relationship between the two brothers was not very good. Lucas had no intention of hiding it and said bluntly that ever since their father had mentioned the inheritance, Daniel had started becoming wary of him. This surprised Evelyn greatly. In everyone's eyes, Daniel was the unquestioned heir. But Lucas dropped an even more shocking piece of news, saying that before their mother died, she had actually asked Daniel to protect him. Hearing this, Evelyn froze completely, because in her memories before rebirth, Lucas was supposed to have died of a hereditary family illness, while in this timeline their mother had actually died of a plague. The more Evelyn thought about it, the more terrifying it became. Someone as outstanding as Lucas was probably already a thorn in Daniel's side. That so-called deathbed request to protect him was very likely only so Daniel could wait until he became Duke, and then personally get rid of him. Even more terrifying, Evelyn remembered the corpse she had seen in her previous life. At the time, Everyone had thought it was Daniel, but now it seemed that person was very likely Lucas. Daniel had deliberately kept her from seeing Lucas, so that at the crucial moment she would completely believe it. So from the very beginning, she had been played for a fool. Evelyn softly asked him that if Daniel really became the head of the family, what did he think he should do? As if he had opened a floodgate, he began talking on and on. He said he wanted to see the world outside the territory, wanted to travel around the world, to see scenery he had never seen before, and to do the things he truly wanted to do. In the past, it had always been his father and brother running about outside, while he could only be trapped in this small corner of the world. Now he only wanted to live freely. Evelyn asked him what the one thing he most wanted to do really was. Lucas kept her guessing, smiling as he said that for the time being it was still a secret. Looking at the way he longed for freedom, Evelyn felt even worse inside. Would this simple dream really still have a chance of coming true? Evelyn was just about to say goodbye to Lucas, saying that once she left this place, there were some things she would tell him in person. But before she could finish speaking, voices from not far away made her stop in her tracks. Things really exploded this time. A servant who had once worked for the Cordelia family was emphatically reporting to Daniel, saying that he had seen that young lady before, and she definitely did not look like this. As soon as these words came out, Evelyn stood frozen in place, suddenly not knowing how to respond. At the same time, the elders in the room were still leisurely drinking tea and lamenting that Sir Cordelia had died too early. They had originally thought about introducing his daughter to Daniel, and now it seemed such a pity. Just then, Edward suddenly cut in, with an unreadable smile at the corner of his mouth. He said that regarding this young lady, he just happened to have a bit of different information. Edward folded his hands on the table, still wearing that trademark elegant smile on his face. At that, the whole room completely erupted. Everyone was discussing that if even her identity was fake, then who exactly was she? And why had she spun such a colossal lie? Daniel turned his head and stared at Evelyn as he asked, could everything this man said actually be true? Evelyn had nowhere left to retreat. How exactly was she supposed to get herself out of this? To everyone's surprise, Evelyn not only did not panic, but calmly pressed for details instead. Since you say you worked there, what exactly were your duties? The man casually made up an excuse. The man casually fabricated a reason, saying that he was responsible for supplying seafood. This time, he had truly hit a brick wall. Evelyn pressed him step by step, demanding that he explain where he picked up the goods every day and who he reported the accounts to. Every question struck straight at the heart of the matter. Seeing the man stammering, Daniel also realized that this fellow was full of lies and putting on an act. Evelyn exposed him directly in public. That estate is 10 times larger than this place. The storage rooms and the living quarters are extremely far apart. How could a delivery man possibly see her every day? Once this logical loophole was exposed, the situation instantly reversed. Who the real liar was had now become perfectly clear. Evelyn sneered inwardly. This man had not even bothered to prepare his lie properly. She used to go to the market often to help out. Anyone who had really worked there could not possibly fail to recognize her. Seeing his lie exposed in public, the man began babbling nonsense. He even said that he had wandered around the estate because he wanted to sneak a look at her. An excuse like that made everyone around feel disgusted. Seeing that no one believed him, the man completely panicked and lashed out. He pointed at Evelyn and shouted that she was definitely a fake, begging Daniel to believe him. Although the man looked like a madman, his words still made Daniel's heart sink. Something really did feel off. Daniel stared at Evelyn. The reason he had acknowledged this fiancé in the first place was only because of that letter. But aside from that letter, what else could prove her identity? Once the seed of suspicion had been planted, the whole situation changed completely. The position Evelyn had worked so hard to stabilize was once again left hanging by a thread. Daniel began dredging up old grudges. He could not forget the humiliation of being suppressed by Evelyn. A haughty woman like this was someone he did not want to tolerate for even one more second. Lucas was still at the side trying to persuade him, saying that for such an important matter, should they not wait until their father returned before making a decision? But Daniel snapped back at him directly. In this house now, he was the one who called the shots. Which meant Evelyn's life was in his hands as well. Daniel gave a cold laugh and ordered that she be thrown into the dungeon first and executed first thing tomorrow morning. The guards immediately drew their swords and blocked the way. They actually dared to go this far. In this deep and secluded mansion, she was now isolated and helpless. Had she really been left with nothing but a dead end? Evelyn spoke harshly, saying that Daniel would definitely regret this. A heavy bag of reward money was handed to that man. After taking the money, the man began to feel afraid once they separated. If the Real investigator arrived, would not all his lies be exposed? Just then, the true mastermind appeared. The maid Charlotte sneered and told him to shut up. As long as he insisted that Evelyn was a fraud, no one would be able to do anything to them. Charlotte was now practically reveling in her petty triumph. She sent away that troublesome witness. In her view, that usually lofty young lady must surely now be hiding in some corner. This kind of fall from grace was more satisfying the more she looked at it. Just imagining that face stained with fear filled her with a surge of delight. So-called nobility would eventually be completely swallowed by the mire. Meanwhile, Evelyn had already completely become a prisoner. Her hands were tightly bound with coarse rope as the guards forcibly escorted her away into the night. At a time like this, meeting force with force was obviously useless. Lowering her stance, Evelyn softly begged the guards to loosen the rope a little, saying that it hurt so much she could not bear it. Seeing her look so weak and delicate, the leading guard indeed felt a pang of sympathy. After all, dressed in such a gorgeous long gown, she really could not run very far. And in the end, the guard softened. Who could have guessed that Evelyn, who had just been begging for mercy, was actually hiding her strength? The instant the rope loosened, she directly drew a sword and struck back. Her whole sequence of movements was smooth and flowing. Before the guards even had time to react, she had already knocked them to the ground. The remaining guards were all dumbfounded. This was no delicate young lady at all, but practically a life-taking demon. Evelyn said with a cold laugh that thanks to their lowered guard, she had finally gotten this chance to escape. The bloodstained sword tip went straight to a throat as she delivered her final warning. If they wanted to live, they had better get lost at once. Today, she did not want to kill one more person. The guards were completely intimidated by her presence and fled stumbling and crawling into the woods. The situation had fully reversed. Now no one could stop her anymore, and she had finally snatched back her life. Standing in the forest, Evelyn let out a long breath. If those two guards had been just a little bolder, then she would have been the one lying on the ground now. After recovering slightly, she looked at the long sword in her hand and felt a wave of unease. It was her first time truly hurting someone with her own hands, and the feeling left her unable to regain her senses for quite a while. Now there were two roads before her. Either take advantage of the chaos and run, which would at least let her avoid tomorrow's execution. But when she thought of her father on his way here, if she left now, then all her previous efforts would have been wasted. She absolutely could not leave the estate. She had to find a place to hide until her father appeared. But in the middle of a night like this, where it could possibly be safe, just then, a thought suddenly flashed through Evelyn's mind. The most dangerous place was often the safest place. She remembered that there was one corner in the estate, a place that fool Daniel would never dream of. As long as she could hide there, no one would be able to find her. Making up her mind, Evelyn lifted her skirt and rushed once more into the darkness. Evelyn finally found a place to hide. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, feeling that as long as she hid in here, she could hold out safely until her father arrived. At this moment, she had only one thought: no matter what, she had to stay alive. Noelle said in a low voice that she had actually stabbed the Duke's guard, and if it was not dealt with, she would surely die this time. Kendrick asked in return, "Then are we still going to help her? If she dies now, our entire plan will be ruined." In the end, the two decided to split up. One would go save that unlucky guard, and the other had to keep a close eye on Evelyn. Kendrick searched in the darkness, muttering under his breath, where exactly did that young lady hide? At this moment, in order to shake off the pursuers behind her, Evelyn stared at the heavy wooden door in front of her and crashed straight into it. This turned out to be the dungeon of the Dans family. Meanwhile, in the grass outside, a long sword and glaring bloodstains had been left behind. Just as Kendrick was searching, another man in the darkness had already found the pool of blood first. What he did next was enough to send chills down one's spine. He actually reached out, dipped his finger into the blood, and tasted it carefully with the tip of his tongue. He chuckled and murmured to himself in a low voice, "This tastes really good." I'm really starting to like Miss Evelyn more and more. Sunlight spilled over the luxurious carriage, and all of this was simply too much of a coincidence. I was also just preparing to head back because I heard news about Miss Evelyn. Connor behaved very politely, constantly thinking about how he could repay the favor of someone taking care of his daughter. But Duke Brantley waved his hand and said that it was all his son's credit. He had thought the boy would not handle it well, but unexpectedly, the result was even better than imagined. At that moment, Connor noticed the person outside the window and could not help asking, "Why is Edward here?" Duke Brantley looked at Edward and said meaningfully, "It was he who specifically came to tell me about Evelyn, which is why I decided to end my trip early and rush back." Although Edward had brought back the news, Connor still felt uneasy inside. He always felt that things were not so simple and could only silently pray in his heart that Evelyn must be safe and sound. Meanwhile, the rumors in the manor had already completely exploded. That girl absolutely had to be a ghost. Otherwise, how could she have killed a guard and then vanished into thin air? A teacup was set down heavily. So many days had passed, yet that bunch of useless guards still had not caught her. Now the situation was truly on the verge of spiraling out of control. The more Daniel thought about it, the angrier he became. A nobleman like him had actually been brought low by a little girl. He turned to look at Lucas, wanting to hear his brother's opinion. Lucas merely lowered his head and drank his tea, casually responding with a sound, clearly with his mind nowhere near this matter. But Daniel had no intention of letting him off. He felt Lucas was too naive, still believing that woman's lies. After all, even until now, no one had seen the guard's corpse. Lucas hesitated for a moment, feeling that perhaps that young lady really did have some hidden circumstances. But the moment he said it, Daniel coldly shot him down. Daniel set down his teacup, his tone filled with malice. No matter what the reason was, they had to completely get rid of this trouble before their father returned. He pounded heavily on the table and ordered Lucas to act as well, to send people out to search immediately, and under no circumstances, let her leave alive. As the two brothers were discussing how to make their move, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. A servant hurried in to report that Duke Brantley had already returned to the estate. Daniel froze on the spot. He had never expected his father to return so quickly. Even worse, he had not yet resolved the trouble named Evelyn. Duke Brantley walked into the room with steady steps. Although he praised his sons for their hard work, this seasoned old hand could tell at a glance that the atmosphere was wrong, and directly asked, "Did something happen?" Daniel forced a smile, desperately concealing the panic in his heart, and repeatedly said that everything at home was fine and that no accident had happened. But Duke Brantley did not buy any of it. His gaze was sharp as he directly threw out the most fatal question. "Where's Miss Evelyn now?" Duke Brantley patted his son's shoulder and said with a smile, "Enough, no need to be modest. I heard Daniel saved that young lady and did a very fine job. The guests are already waiting in the drawing room now, so have him quickly bring Evelyn over to meet them." Daniel was completely dumbfounded now. He had no one to bring over at all, so he could only brace himself and begin making up lies, saying that the girl named Evelyn was actually a complete fraud and that he was just planning to arrest her. Just as he was desperately trying to patch up his lie, a servant suddenly burst in, shouting at the top of his lungs that she had been found. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Duke Brantley and Daniel both turned around at the same time. No one had expected that at this critical moment, the vanished girl would actually appear. She had actually been found in their own family dungeon. Duke Brantley rushed to the scene with his two sons, and the whole family was stunned. Looking at Evelyn locked inside the iron cage, Connor could hardly believe his own eyes and loudly demanded to know what exactly was going on. But Evelyn was extraordinarily calm. Through the iron bars, she openly performed a standard noble curtsy. She said that she was the only daughter of Duke Cordelia, Evelyn Cordelia. As for this family's underground dungeon, the rumors about it were each more outrageous than the last. It was said that anyone who went in was never intended to come out alive. Daniel actually admitted in person that all of it was true. He said with a smile that it was all for the family's rules, and even advised Evelyn not to be too kind-hearted. He guaranteed that the dungeon was empty now, but Evelyn did not believe a single word of it. Locking people up at will, without any charge, was no different from treating human life like grass. While the guards were away, she still slipped in on her own. Looking at the scene before her, she knew the rumors had probably been an understatement. The dungeon was lifeless, without even the shadow of a living person. It seemed this place really had been abandoned for a long time. Hiding in the shadows, Evelyn's mind was full of the guards she had stabbed. If she had been a little calmer at the time, would there have been no need for bloodshed? At this point, she began to doubt whether what she had done was right. But the arrow had already left the bow, and there was no turning back. In a few more days, her father would arrive, and that was her last chance. As long as she could hold out until the guard's next patrol, all the truth would no longer be able to stay hidden. She only had to hold on a little longer. Evelyn repeated it over and over in her heart, because she knew Edward would definitely come to save her. But just at that moment, in the corner of the dungeon, several eerie straw dolls suddenly appeared. This place really was hiding shameful secrets. Several days passed like this. In the end, she did not wait for Edward, and was instead dragged out first by the guards. Connor looked at the daughter before him, and could hardly believe his own eyes. At this moment, Evelyn looked as miserable as could be. Seeing that Evelyn was safe and sound, Connor's hanging heart finally settled. But before father and daughter could exchange many words, Daniel anxiously jumped out to claim credit. He kept saying that for the safety of the territory, he had no choice but to monitor these suspicious people. Before he could even finish speaking, Duke Brantley backhanded him with a slap. This roar stunned everyone present. Duke Brantley grabbed his son's collar and cursed him as an irredeemable idiot. Duke Brantley had originally wanted to use Evelyn to curry favor with an even more powerful family, but now Daniel's series of actions had directly ruined the family's last chance to turn things around. On the surface, Daniel did not dare to fight back, but in his heart, he hated to the extreme. In his view, his father, who had squandered the family fortune, was the real good for nothing. Just as the father and son were arguing fiercely, an elegant voice suddenly cut in, suggesting that everyone move somewhere else to talk and not disturb the lady present. Evelyn suddenly lifted her head. That figure she had thought about day and night had actually really appeared before her. Their gazes collided instantly, and it felt as though her heart had skipped a beat. All the thousands of words she had prepared got stuck in her throat. Edward simply stood there, calm and composed. Duke Brantley was now completely stunned. He had never imagined that the young man before him was actually the Emperor's own nephew. The anxiety hanging in Evelyn's heart finally eased. She had known this man would definitely appear on time and would never let her down. Edward smiled faintly, as if telling her that as long as he was there, no one would dare touch a single hair on her head again. Duke Brantley was a clever man. He knew how to wrap things up now, and immediately instructed Lucas to first take the distinguished guests away to rest. Right after that, He turned to look at Daniel beside him, his tone so cold it sent chills down one's spine, and told him to come along immediately. Now Daniel was completely panicked. He knew his father was truly enraged this time. If he could not provide a reasonable explanation, his good days were probably about to come to an end. Connor was now endlessly grateful to Edward, feeling that this royal noble had been secretly protecting his daughter all along, and even apologized to him for having concealed things earlier. But how could he know that Edward and Evelyn had long since colluded? They had deliberately hidden the details of their meeting and made up a flawless lie. Connor kept praising Edward for his courage. Being able to rescue Evelyn even on someone else's territory, he was simply the great benefactor of their family. Evelyn sat silently to the side. She knew more clearly than anyone that Edward's help had nothing to do with any sense of justice, but was instead a clearly priced transaction. But no matter what Edward's purpose was, he really had rescued her from the dungeon. Evelyn still kept this life-saving favor in her heart. She softly thanked Edward. Edward merely smiled faintly, as if everything was under his control. Edward was acting this part more and more deeply. Right in front of Connor, he praised Evelyn to the skies, saying that even without his help, Evelyn herself would have been able to escape danger. Evelyn listened in complete confusion, utterly unable to figure out what this man was really up to, and could only sit quietly to the side and cooperate. Connor, however, was very pleased to hear it. He sighed that his daughter truly was clever, otherwise she could not possibly have survived safely until now. Then he cautiously asked what exactly had happened over the past half year. Evelyn had already thought of a countermeasure. She put on an act as if she remembered nothing, saying that when she woke up, she was already on the main road, and that her mind was completely blank. Connor was heartbroken and quickly comforted her, telling her not to think too much about it, that once they returned home and she had a good rest, her memories would surely slowly come back. Evelyn noticed a person standing at the door. He was wearing a neat uniform and was silently watching everything in the room. Evelyn could not help asking who exactly the man guarding the door was. Only then did Connor come to his senses. He had been so busy catching up with his daughter that he had delayed the serious matter. He smiled and apologized to Edward, then led in the man who had been standing guard at the door. This man was called Finley. Connor publicly announced that starting today, Finley would be Evelyn's personal bodyguard. Evelyn was completely stunned. She had never expected her father to suddenly assign her a guard, especially one who would stay by her side at all times. At that moment, Edward, who was standing nearby, fell silent. Although he said nothing, the cold expression on his face already explained everything. Evelyn became even more uneasy. Although she knew this was her father's good intention, she still had so many secrets to deal with, and having an extra pair of eyes by her side would only make things much more difficult in the future. Seeing that she did not respond for a long while, her father asked her a question. Only then did Evelyn snap back to her senses and quickly hide her true thoughts. Her father was still going on and on with his praise. He said that Finley came from the Royal Knights, and with him around, she would be absolutely safe. On the surface, Evelyn remained polite, but inside she was wailing. This time, there was truly no escaping it. Edward, who was sitting nearby, was not so easily fooled. He suddenly asked why a dignified royal knight would come all the way here just to serve as a mere personal guard. The question left Finley speechless, and he could only stammer that it was for personal reasons. After hearing that, Edward became even more relentless and immediately turned the pressure onto Evelyn. Seeing the atmosphere growing more and more tense, Evelyn could only force herself to step forward and formally accept this new guard, though it seemed her days ahead would no longer be peaceful. Since things had already come to this, Evelyn decided to take things one step at a time. After all, her father had already spoken, and the rest of the trouble could wait until they got home. Finley, however, was quick to catch on and immediately changed the way he addressed her, calling her my lady. This infuriated Edward beside them, and he let out a strange, sarcastic snort. Just then, a knock came from outside the door. Duke Brantley pushed the door open and entered, apologizing as he sat down across from the two of them. But no one expected that as soon as the elder had settled into his seat, his very first sentence would plunge the entire room into dead silence. He said that fortunately, his son had made an irreparable mistake. Duke Brantley lowered his head in public together with Daniel, repeatedly asking for forgiveness. Daniel was even more humble to the extreme, repeatedly saying that everything that had happened before was due to his misunderstanding and that Evelyn had suffered because of it. Looking at the scene before her, Evelyn did not feel relieved in the slightest. Could a light, casual apology really erase everything that had happened? At that moment, Edward stepped forward with a cold laugh. He had no intention of saving the other party's face and directly tore open the truth with one sharp remark. This was not some misunderstanding at all. If no one had returned in time, Evelyn would probably already be dead by now. As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere at the scene instantly dropped to freezing point. Seeing that the situation was about to spiral out of control, Daniel inwardly cursed Edward for meddling. He even disregarded his status and tightly grabbed Evelyn's hand, promising that he would be willing to do anything in the future to make amends. This deeply affectionate appearance might have fooled others, but Evelyn felt nothing but disgust. Just as Daniel thought he could muddle through, Evelyn suddenly shook off his hand. Her tone was cold to the extreme as she said that such behavior only made her feel uncomfortable. Now it was Daniel's turn to be dumbfounded. He had never expected that the woman who used to be so easy to talk to would now refuse to give him even the slightest way out. In his eyes, Evelyn had simply gone mad to dare embarrass him in public like this. What angered him even more was that Edward, an outsider, dared to interfere as well. He suspected that all of this was Edward's doing behind the scenes. Since begging for mercy was useless, Daniel simply turned hostile and instead threatened Evelyn, demanding that she speak. He even shamelessly turned the accusation around in public, saying that Evelyn had also committed a grave crime because one of the guards in the household had died under mysterious circumstances. The moment the word murder was spoken, Daniel, in order to protect himself, directly pinned a human life onto her. Daniel clung to the accusation and insisted that Evelyn must pay the price for this commoner's death. Daniel pressed this charge so firmly that even a noble young lady would never be able to escape unscathed once burdened with a murder case. Although Evelyn felt the matter was absurd, the thought that someone might really have died because of her still threw her into panic. She could not help but question Daniel, asking if he truly intended to send her to prison. Seeing that she had already begun to waver, Daniel's tone suddenly became playful. He said that filing charges was not the outcome anyone wanted to see. What he truly wanted was actually a deal. Just as the tension in the air reached its peak, the maid Charlotte was running frantically down the corridor, lifting her skirt. Charlotte was rushing down the hallway in a panic, and when she looked up, she happened to run straight into Lucas. Before she could even steady herself, Lucas directly exposed her secret. It turned out that the merchant who had caused trouble at the party had been secretly brought in by Charlotte. Charlotte was completely flustered now. She thought Lucas was also going to take Evelyn's side, and just as she was about to beg for mercy, Lucas suddenly changed his expression. He comforted Charlotte and told her not to worry, saying that he would never tell his father about this, because he absolutely could not stand by and watch Daniel lose his inheritance over a maid's mistake. A trace of cold malice appeared in Lucas's smile. It turned out that he had done all this not for any sense of justice at all. He simply wanted to personally push Daniel onto the ducal seat. Daniel's scheme was truly loud and clear. Putting on a face as though he were considering everyone's interests and fearing that things would get out of hand, he directly demanded that Evelyn remain obediently at Dan's manor during this period of time. How could this be any kind of suggestion? It was clearly an attempt to place Evelyn under house arrest in disguise. Evelyn could hardly believe her ears. She could not believe he actually had the nerve to say such an unreasonable demand out loud. But Daniel's ambition did not stop there. Not only did he want to control Evelyn, he even turned his aim towards Sir Connor and Edward, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines. He wanted to wipe out everyone who opposed him in one sweep and make them all keep quiet on his own territory. Faced with such naked provocation, Edward said nothing at all and merely watched him perform with cold eyes. In the end, Daniel swept his gaze around the room and, with a tone full of threat, asked whether everyone agreed with this decision. Connor was enraged on the spot. This was not discussion at all. It was clearly an attempt to imprison everyone in disguise. Just as the situation was about to spiral out of control, Edward, who had remained silent all this time, suddenly spoke. Edward wanted to search for clues by examining the corpse, but that old fox, Duke Brantley, had already blocked the way, using the excuse that the body had already been claimed by the family. Immediately afterward, Duke Brantley dropped all pretense and began threatening them directly, saying that if the news of Evelyn killing someone got out, not only would her reputation be ruined, she would likely even be sentenced to death. Now he had successfully seized everyone's weak point. In order to keep the matter from blowing up, Evelyn could only choose to lower her head and agree to stay in this troublesome place. Daniel's smug, villainous expression was truly infuriating to look at. He hypocritically stated that he would certainly take good care of Evelyn while she stayed behind. When no one else was around, Connor was heartbroken and even wanted to remain behind as a hostage in his daughter's place. But Evelyn knew more clearly than anyone that there was no avoiding this at all. Daniel had gone to such great lengths because, from beginning to end, his only target had been her. If she fell into the hands of someone like him, her days ahead would probably not be easy. What Duke Brantley and his group were scheming for in the end was money. They wanted to use this windfall to fill the hole of their bankruptcy. Connor knew very well that the reason the other side dared to make such outrageous demands was because they held Evelyn's fatal weakness in their hands. He remained silent for a long time, but in the end he still could not help asking the most heartbreaking question of all. Was it really you who killed that person? Faced with her father's questioning, Evelyn did not defend herself. A single "I'm sorry" was enough to make Connor's heart go cold completely. Although her father did not continue pressing the matter, he understood in his heart that this was a capital crime, and things had already reached the point of no return. In the eyes of those self-important nobles, a human life might be nothing more than a bargaining chip in their game, but to Connor, hurting others had never been a trivial matter. He did not continue asking about the details of that night either. To him, nothing mattered more than his daughter's safety. Looking at the daughter before him, Now much more mature than before, Connor's eyes were full of relief. He knew that Evelyn must have made what she believed was the best choice. He sighed that his daughter had truly changed. She was no longer the little girl who needed protection, but had become bolder and braver. This unconditional trust became Evelyn's strongest support amid the storm. Evelyn broke down in tears in her father's arms. Other than saying she was sorry, she did not know what else she could say. Connor did not blame her, but only gently accepted all of his daughter's grievances. Edward ran into Daniel in the corridor, and the moment these two met, the air was filled with gunpowder. Edward gave a cold laugh and mocked him, saying that he was being kept here against his will. Daniel remained expressionless and shamelessly said that it was only to let them experience his warm hospitality. Looking at Daniel's hypocritical smile, this man was nothing but a thoroughly sinister bastard. Daniel was still feeling pleased with himself, thinking that since he had managed to keep Evelyn here, he was one step closer to marriage. But before he could finish speaking, his father, Duke Brantley, fiercely slapped him across the face. Duke Brantley scolded him for being a fool, saying that the current situation was merely cleaning up the mess from before. He solemnly warned his son that Edward was no ordinary opponent, but a ruthless figure whom even the Emperor could not control. In Duke Brantley's eyes, cooperating with Edward was like seeking the skin of a tiger. After making use of him, they would have to get rid of him immediately, and absolutely could not leave future trouble behind. Daniel immediately asked what exactly the relationship was between him and Evelyn, his tone full of probing. Edward said that the two families were old family friends, and that he and Evelyn had known each other since childhood, so there was nothing to worry about this time. Edward waved his hand elegantly and said that for tomorrow's banquet, he needed to go back and rest first. Before leaving, he did not forget to politely wish Daniel a good night. But the moment he turned and walked away, Daniel's face darkened, and he stared at that arrogant, retreating figure while cursing inwardly that he was truly an arrogant bastard. On the other side, Evelyn was about to return to her room when Edward stopped her in the corridor, as if he had already been waiting there for her. Edward smiled and leaned in, teasing that now there were only the two of them here, and it felt like a little secret that belonged only to the two of them, his tone full of ambiguous probing. Evelyn was clearly already used to his ways. With a helpless expression, she told him to stop it already and say whatever he wanted. Where exactly did you go during that time just now? He admitted directly that he had been trying to find a way to escape, but what Edward said next left her completely stunned. He said that the guard whom Evelyn had stabbed was actually not dead at all. Evelyn could hardly believe it and repeatedly confirmed whether it was really true. Edward explained that although the man had lost quite a lot of blood, that injury was not fatal at all. He pointed out bluntly that a novice who had never even held a knife before could never have easily wounded a trained guard. This was obviously a trap, a performance deliberately staged by Daniel and Duke Brantley in order to control her. Upon learning that she had not killed anyone, the huge weight pressing on Evelyn's heart finally lifted. She could not help sighing in relief, saying thank goodness. Seeing the way Evelyn looked so relieved, Edward paused for a moment. A trace of complicated emotion appeared in his eyes, as if there were even deeper words he had not spoken aloud. Looking at the woman before him, Edward felt that she was completely different from how she used to be. The old Evelyn had been like a flower in a greenhouse, but now she was unexpectedly strong. Yet he realized that he had already grown used to this version of her. At that moment, Evelyn suddenly realized something. She stared at Edward and asked why he knew these details so clearly. There had clearly been only two guards at the scene at the time. Unless he had also been secretly watching, there was no way to explain it. Edward did not answer directly. Instead, he smiled and asked in return whether that was important. The important thing was that the guard was indeed still alive. Evelyn was immediately left speechless. Although she still had doubts in her heart, she knew that there was no longer any meaning in dwelling on this now. Edward assumed an uncommunicative posture, clearly having no intention of answering any questions. Evelyn knew very well that this man had far too many secrets. From the marketplace to the inn, and even to the edge of that cliff, Edward had managed to save her with perfect precision every single time, as though he had foreseen every danger in advance. A bold thought appeared in Evelyn's mind. Could it be that Edward, like her, had also been reborn from the future? Although the idea sounded absurd, nothing else could explain why he seemed to know everything. But since he did not want to say anything, Evelyn decided not to press him further. Edward asked her what she planned to do next. Evelyn remained very calm. As long as the truth came to light, she would have no reason to continue staying at this manor. Although her current situation was very unfair, staying behind was her own choice, because there were still far too many mysteries here waiting for her to uncover with her own hands. Evelyn was hiding a shocking secret in her heart. For years later, her father would be falsely accused and die an unjust death, while Daniel would seize all of the family property and even take her life. She suspected that the mastermind behind everything was hidden within Dan's manor, so no matter what, she had to stay and keep a close watch on these people. Looking at the woman before him, Edward noticed that she had become calm again, as if the vulnerability from just now had never appeared at all. At that moment, Lucas suddenly appeared. He still wore the appearance of a gentle and courteous gentleman and said that he felt very sorry for Daniel's behavior. Edward let out a cold laugh at the side and directly exposed his hypocrisy in public. If he truly felt sorry, then why not go explain everything clearly to Evelyn's father? If it was only empty words without any action, then such an apology was utterly worthless. In Edward's eyes, Lucas and Daniel were fundamentally birds of a feather. Evelyn felt that Edward's hostility was too strong, and Edward even began to suspect whether Evelyn was speaking up for an outsider. After Lucas left, Edward told Evelyn that tomorrow's banquet would be the real trouble, and that uninvited guests would definitely appear by then. But he did not notice that a pair of eyes in the shadows was staring fixedly at them. Watching the two of them standing so close, the maid Charlotte's heart was filled with jealousy and confusion. She could not understand why this woman was allowed to be so close to Edward. Charlotte hid in the shadows and eavesdropped. At first, she worried that Evelyn might report her, but then on second thought, a noble young lady as self-righteous as Evelyn would never stoop to tattling. Not only did Charlotte have no intention of stopping, she instead felt that this was a perfect chance to turn her life around. As long as she could drive Evelyn away from Daniel's side, she would never again have to remain a lowly maid for the rest of her life.